No one explains what really happens inside this prison. Not in courtrooms. Not in sentencing documents. Not in the short news clips that flash across your screen and disappear just as quickly. What you're told is clean, official, and incomplete. What you're not told is everything that actually matters. From the outside, this place looks like concrete and steel, razor wire and watchtowers. A facility with rules, routines, and order. But once the doors close behind you, the reality changes instantly. Time bends. Silence becomes heavy. And survival stops being about strength or innocence and starts being about adaptation. The first thing nobody warns you about is how fast the world you knew disappears. Your name is replaced with a number. Your clothes are replaced with fabric that doesn't belong to you. Your choices are reduced to what you can eat, where you can stand, when you can sleep. Even your thoughts feel monitored, because in here, thinking the wrong way can be just as dangerous as acting the wrong way. They don't tell you about the noise. The constant echo of metal doors slamming. The distant shouting that never fully stops. The alarms that go off without explanation. At night, when the lights dim but never truly turn off, the sounds get louder. Someone crying in a cell you can't see. Someone yelling threats they may or may not mean. Someone else laughing for reasons you don't want to understand. They don't tell you about the unspoken rules. The ones written nowhere but enforced everywhere. Where you sit. Where you walk. Who you look at. How long you look. One wrong glance can start something that doesn't end when the guards arrive. Because when it's over, you still have to live next to the same people tomorrow. They don't explain how fear works in here. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and constant. It wakes up with you. It eats meals with you. It follows you to the shower, where privacy doesn't exist and vulnerability is unavoidable. You learn quickly that showing fear makes you a target, but pretending you don't feel it can get you hurt just as fast. They don't explain how loneliness hits harder when you're surrounded by people. Hundreds of bodies, thousands of eyes, and still no one you can trust. Conversations are filtered. Stories are half-told. Everyone is measuring everyone else, trying to figure out who's real, who's dangerous, and who's desperate enough to do anything. They don't tell you about the guards who treat this like a job and the guards who treat it like power. About the difference between protection and control. About how some days you're ignored completely and other days you're reminded just how small you are in a system that doesn't need you to understand it. They don't explain how time stops making sense. Days blur together. Weeks disappear. A year can feel like a lifetime, and a lifetime can be reduced to a number on a file. Birthdays pass. Holidays pass. The outside world moves on without you, and eventually you stop expecting it to wait. They don't explain what isolation really does to the mind. How silence can become loud. How your own thoughts can start arguing back. How memories replay themselves until they lose meaning. Some people talk to the walls. Some talk to themselves. Some stop talking altogether. They don't tell you about the choices people make just to feel something. Starting fights they can't win. Breaking rules they know the consequences for. Anything to escape the numbness, even for a moment. Pain becomes proof that you still exist. They don't explain how survival changes you. How morals bend. How lines blur. How things you once believed were impossible start to feel normal. You adapt, not because you want to, but because you have to. And once you adapt, the question becomes whether you'll recognize yourself when you finally leave. They don't tell you about the guilt. Not just guilt over crimes, but guilt over who you become inside. Over the moments you stayed silent. Over the moments you didn't. Over the fact that surviving sometimes means letting someone else fall. They don't explain why some people leave broken, some leave hardened, and some never really leave at all, even after the gates open. Because the prison doesn't always stay behind the walls. Sometimes it follows you home. This is what no one explains. This is what never makes it into the official story. And once you understand what really happens inside this prison, you'll never look at punishment, justice, or freedom the same way again. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. No one prepares you for the moment the gates close behind you. You hear it before you feel it. A deep metallic echo that doesn't just come from the doors, but from the walls, the floor, the air itself. It's the sound of separation. The sound of the outside world being cut off in a single motion. In that instant, something shifts inside you, whether you realize it or not. Because everything before that sound belongs to your old life. Everything after belongs to this place. Chapter 1 begins right there. The intake process is where the prison introduces itself. Not with words, but with actions. Orders are shouted, not explained. Lines are formed, broken, reformed. You're told where to stand, when to move, when to stop. Questions are ignored. Confusion is expected. Compliance is mandatory. Your personal belongings are taken first. Wallet, phone, keys, photos, anything that reminds you that you once made decisions for yourself. They slide across a counter and disappear into plastic bins, labeled and locked away. You're told you'll get them back someday, but someday is a word that loses meaning very quickly in here. Then comes the stripping away of identity. Clothes off, uniform on, same color, same fabric, same cut as everyone else. It doesn't matter who you were outside, what you did, what you owned, or what you believed. In here, you look like everyone else, and that's the point. This is where time begins to slow down. Hours pass without clocks. Days start without dates. You wait because there's nothing else to do. You wait to be processed. You wait to be searched. You wait to be told where you'll sleep. Waiting becomes the first lesson, and patience becomes a survival skill. Around you, faces tell different stories. Some look terrified, eyes darting, shoulders tense, bodies already bracing for impact. Others look numb, like they've rehearsed this moment so many times that reality feels unreal. A few look calm, even confident, as if this environment is familiar territory. Those are the ones everyone watches carefully. No one explains who is who. You're expected to figure that out on your own. The first walk through the unit is when the prison truly reveals itself. Rows of cells stacked like concrete boxes. Narrow walkways. Steel railings. Doors with small windows that allow guards to see in, but rarely allow you to see out. Every surface feels hard, cold, unforgiving. Even the air feels different, heavier somehow. You notice the silence immediately. Not because it's quiet, but because it's controlled. Conversations happen in low tones. Laughter sounds forced. Every noise feels measured, like people are constantly deciding whether it's safe to make a sound at all. This is where the unspoken rules begin. No one hands you a manual, but everyone expects you to know it. Don't stare too long. Don't ask too many questions. Don't touch anything that isn't yours. Don't sit where you haven't been invited. Respect, in here, isn't about manners. It's about survival. Your cell is smaller than you imagined. Smaller than any room you've ever lived in. A metal bed. A thin mattress. A toilet that offers no privacy. Maybe a small shelf. Maybe nothing at all. The door closes with another echo, and suddenly you understand how small your world has become. Night doesn't bring relief. Lights dim, but never shut off completely. The shadows stretch, but they never fully hide anything. Sounds travel through the unit. Coughing, pacing, whispered arguments, sudden outbursts that make your heart race even when they're not directed at you. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by noise, fear, and the constant awareness that you are not alone, even when you desperately want to be. Morning arrives without ceremony. Count time. Stand up. Be visible. Be accounted for. Meals are rushed, eaten quickly, eyes always scanning. Food is fuel, not comfort. No one lingers longer than necessary. This is when the reality sets in. You start to realize that everything in here operates on control. Movement is controlled. Speech is controlled. Time is controlled. Even your emotions feel like they're being managed by the environment. Anger is dangerous. Fear is visible. Weakness is noticed immediately. And yet, despite all of that, life continues. People form routines. Some exercise obsessively, building bodies as armor. Some read, escaping into pages because it's the only place they can still travel freely. Some gamble, trade, hustle, creating underground economies that operate quietly beneath the official system. Order exists, but it's not always the order you're shown. The guards remain ever present, but distant. Some watch without emotion, some with suspicion, some with boredom. Their presence is a reminder that power here is absolute, and accountability feels optional. By the end of the first week, something changes. You stop counting the hours. You stop thinking about what time it is outside. Your thoughts begin to shrink to the size of your surroundings. You think about meals, about count, about staying out of trouble, about getting through the day without standing out too much or disappearing entirely. This is the moment the prison starts working. Not because it's violent, not because it's loud, but because it's persistent. Because it never stops reminding you where you are and what you are now. An inmate, a number, a body occupying space in a system that does not bend for individuals. Chapter 1 ends with acceptance, whether you want it or not. Not acceptance of guilt, not acceptance of punishment, but acceptance of reality. You are here. The gates are closed, and everything about your life now exists within these walls. What happens next depends on how well you learn the rules no one ever explains. No one ever sits you down and explains how things really work in here. There is no orientation video for survival, no handbook for staying alive, no official document that tells you what matters and what doesn't. Instead, the rules reveal themselves slowly, through tension, through consequences, through watching what happens to other people who didn't learn fast enough. Chapter 2 begins the moment you realize that following the official rules is only half the battle. On paper, the rules are simple. Obey orders. Stay in your assigned area. Don't fight. Don't steal. Don't cause disturbances. These are the rules the institution enforces. But beneath them exists another system entirely, one that governs daily life far more effectively than any written policy ever could. These are the rules no one writes down. The first unspoken rule is awareness. You are expected to know what's happening around you at all times. Not in an obvious way, not with exaggerated caution, but with quiet attention. Who just walked in? Who just left? Who's watching who? Awareness isn't paranoia here. It's protection, because ignorance gets noticed. People who drift through the unit without paying attention stand out immediately. They miss subtle warnings. They sit in the wrong place. They speak to the wrong person the wrong way. And when something happens to them, no one is surprised. In here, being unaware is interpreted as being careless, and carelessness invites consequences. The second rule is respect, but not the kind you're used to. Respect in prison has nothing to do with politeness or friendliness. It's about boundaries. Where you stand, how close you get, what you touch, how you speak about others when they're not present. Respect means not testing someone unless you're prepared for the outcome. Even tone matters. A sentence spoken one way can pass unnoticed. The same sentence spoken another way can be taken as a challenge. And challenges rarely stay verbal for long. That's why most conversations are short, measured, and intentionally incomplete. Saying less is often safer than saying too much. Then there's the rule about looking. Eye contact means something different in here. Too little, and you're seen as weak. Too much, and you're seen as aggressive. There's a narrow middle ground that everyone learns to navigate instinctively. A quick glance of acknowledgement. No staring. No lingering. Just enough to show awareness without invitation. It sounds small. It isn't. Entire conflicts start over a look that lasted 1 second too long. Another rule no one explains is about space. Space is currency in prison. Who sits where? Who uses which phone? Who gets which table? These things may look random to an outsider, but they aren't. Every area has an informal owner, even if that ownership isn't visible at first. Sit in the wrong spot, and someone will correct you. Sometimes with words, sometimes without them. The correction isn't always violent, but it's always deliberate. A reminder that you are new, and new people don't get to decide anything yet. Then there's the rule of association. Who you talk to matters. Who you're seen with matters even more. Aligning yourself with the wrong person can place you in conflicts you never agreed to. Declining to associate with anyone at all can make you look isolated, and isolation can be dangerous too. So people walk a careful line. They speak just enough to seem normal. They keep interactions neutral. They avoid making promises or commitments early on. Trust is built slowly, if it's built at all. In here, trust is a liability until proven otherwise. The guards, meanwhile, exist in a parallel reality. They enforce the official rules, but they are not blind to the unofficial ones. Some ignore them as long as order is maintained. Some quietly rely on them to keep the unit stable. Others disrupt them intentionally, just to remind everyone who ultimately holds power. This creates a strange balance. The prison pretends the inmate hierarchy doesn't exist, while simultaneously benefiting from it. Conflicts are contained. Order is maintained. Violence is predictable, and predictability is easier to manage than chaos. Another unwritten rule is emotional control. Displays of emotion are dangerous. Anger escalates situations quickly. Sadness attracts attention you may not want. Fear is the most visible emotion of all, and once it's seen, it can't be unseen. So people learn to flatten themselves. Faces become neutral. Voices become calm. Reactions are delayed or suppressed entirely. Even good news is received quietly, because excitement draws eyes, and eyes bring questions. This emotional discipline isn't taught. It's learned by watching what happens to those who can't control themselves. The final rule of Chapter 2 is silence. Not complete silence, but selective silence. Knowing what not to repeat. Knowing which stories stay where they're told. Knowing when to hear something and pretend you didn't. Information spreads fast in prison, and once your name is attached to it, you lose control over where it goes. Snitches aren't created by talking to guards alone. They're created by talking too much to anyone. By the end of this chapter, you begin to understand something critical. The prison isn't just a building. It's a living system. One that adapts, responds, and enforces itself through pressure rather than instruction. The rules no one writes down are enforced more consistently than the ones posted on the wall, because the consequences are immediate and personal. You don't learn these rules because someone teaches you. You learn them because you have to. And once you've learned them, forgetting them is not an option. Chapter 2 ends when you realize that survival here isn't about strength or toughness. It's about reading the room, controlling yourself, and respecting a code that exists whether you agree with it or not. The prison doesn't change you all at once. It works slowly, patiently, the way pressure shapes stone. At first, you tell yourself you're the same person you were on the outside. Same thoughts, same values, same limits. You promise yourself that this place won't touch who you are, only where you are. That belief feels necessary in the beginning. It feels like protection. It doesn't last. Chapter 3 begins the moment you realize that survival here requires adjustment, and adjustment always comes with a cost. Inside the prison, identity is not something you declare. It's something you demonstrate. Every day, every interaction, every reaction. Who you are is defined less by your words and more by how you move, how you respond, how you handle pressure when it shows up unannounced. At first, you're careful. You think before you speak. You replay conversations in your head afterward, analyzing what you said and how it might have been interpreted. You notice how often people are watching you, even when they pretend not to be. Attention becomes something you manage deliberately, like a resource that can be wasted or weaponized. Then something shifts. You start to realize that caution alone isn't enough. Being invisible doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it marks you as uncertain. Sometimes it invites questions. And in a place where questions can lead to tests, being tested is dangerous. So you begin to adapt. Your posture changes first. Shoulders back, chin level. Not aggressive, but not submissive either. You learn how to stand in a way that communicates awareness without challenge. It's subtle, but it matters. People read bodies faster than they read words in here. Then your voice changes. You speak less, but when you do speak, it's firmer. Shorter sentences. Clear statements. You stop explaining yourself. Explanations sound like weakness in this environment, even when they're honest. Confidence, even when it's borrowed, travels further than truth. This is how the prison starts teaching you its language. You also begin to notice how quickly empathy becomes complicated. On the outside, pain invites comfort. Inside, pain can invite danger. You see people struggling, breaking down, unraveling under the weight of isolation and time. Your first instinct is to help, to listen, to care. Then you see what happens to people who show too much compassion. They get pulled into conflicts that aren't theirs. They inherit other people's problems. They become emotional anchors in a place where anchors get dragged underwater. Slowly, you learn to limit how much of yourself you give away. Not because you want to become cold, because staying soft in a hard place can destroy you. Chapter 3 is where morality starts bending. Not snapping, bending. You tell yourself it's temporary, that you're doing what you need to do to get through the day, the week, the sentence. You justify small changes first, ignoring something you would have spoken up about before, laughing at something that would have bothered you outside, staying quiet when silence benefits you. Each decision feels minor on its own. Together, they add up. You start to understand why people make choices in here that don't make sense from the outside, why alliances form that seem illogical, why lines get crossed slowly instead of all at once. Survival creates its own logic, and that logic doesn't always match the one you brought with you. Trust becomes the rarest currency of all. You might talk to dozens of people every day, but truly trust almost no one. You learn to compartmentalize. This person is safe for casual conversation. That person is safe for information. Another is safe for silence. Very few are safe for honesty. Even friendships feel conditional. Not fake, but fragile. Everyone understands that circumstances can change quickly. Transfers happen. Lockdowns happen. Rumors spread. And loyalty, in here, is often tested without warning. You learn not to depend too heavily on anyone, because dependence creates vulnerability. The longer you're inside, the more you recognize the signs of change within yourself. You react faster. You assume motives. You red threat where there may be none. Your nervous system stays on edge, even during calm moments. Relaxation feels unfamiliar, almost irresponsible. You sleep lighter. You listen harder. You scan automatically. This hyper-awareness keeps you safe. It also follows you everywhere. Chapter 3 is where you begin to question who you're becoming. Not in a dramatic way, not with sudden realizations, but in quiet moments, when you catch yourself thinking in ways you never did before. When certain thoughts feel normal instead of alarming. When things that once shocked you barely register at all. You wonder if this is growth or damage. The answer is usually both. Some people lean into the change. They harden themselves intentionally, embracing the identity the prison rewards. Strength, dominance, reputation, control. For them, survival becomes performance, and performance becomes identity. Others resist quietly. They hold on to routines that remind them of who they were. Reading, writing, exercising with discipline instead of aggression. Mentally rehearsing the life they want after release. These acts become small rebellions against the environment, proof that not everything inside them belongs to this place. Most people fall somewhere in between, adapting just enough to survive, resisting just enough to recognize themselves in the mirror. Chapter 3 ends with a realization that's hard to accept, but impossible to ignore. The prison doesn't just confine your body. It negotiates with your identity. Every day, it asks what you're willing to trade for safety, for peace, for another day without conflict. And every day, you answer, whether you mean to or not. By the time you understand this, the changes are already happening. The question is no longer whether the prison will change you. The question is how much of yourself you'll still recognize when you finally walk out. Nothing inside this prison hurts all at once. The real damage is done slowly, through time. Chapter 4 begins when you stop asking what day it is. At first, time feels heavy because you're counting it. You mark days in your head. You replay the calendar over and over, trying to stay oriented. Monday, Tuesday, court date, commissary day, phone call day. You cling to structure because structure reminds you that time is still moving forward. But eventually, something breaks. The days stop feeling separate. They blur into a single, endless stretch of routine. Wake up, count, eat, wait, move, count again, lock in, lock out, eat, wait, sleep, repeat. The repetition becomes so complete that weeks can pass without a clear memory of any single day inside them. That's when you realize time in prison isn't neutral. It's a weapon. On the outside, time is something you spend. Inside, time is something that happens to you. You don't control it. You don't negotiate with it. You endure it. And endurance becomes the measure of everything. The prison doesn't need to punish you loudly. It doesn't need chaos or constant violence. It relies on something far more effective: waiting. Waiting to be called. Waiting to be counted. Waiting to eat. Waiting to shower. Waiting to see if mail comes. Waiting to hear your name on a list. Most of your life becomes waiting for someone else to decide when you're allowed to move. This constant waiting changes how your mind works. You start thinking in shorter segments. Not months. Not years. Meals. Counts. Lights out. You break your sentence down into pieces small enough to survive. Thinking too far ahead feels dangerous, because the distance between now and freedom is too wide to hold comfortably in your head. So you shrink your future. People outside talk about doing time, but inside, time does something to you. It presses down. It stretches moments that hurt and compresses moments that don't. A bad interaction can echo in your head for days. A good moment disappears almost instantly. Even good news feels strange. A letter arrives. A phone call goes through. Someone remembers your birthday. You feel a brief rush of relief, followed by an immediate crash when the moment ends. Because reminders of the outside world also remind you of how far away it is. This is where hope becomes complicated. Too much hope can destroy you in here. It makes every delay feel personal. Every denied request feels final. Every setback feels heavier than it should. So people learn to ration hope carefully, the same way they ration energy or trust. Some stop hoping altogether. They tell themselves this is life now, that expecting anything else only leads to disappointment. They move through the days on autopilot, conserving emotion, conserving thought. On the surface, they look stable. Inside, they're numb. Others cling to specific dates, release dates, parole hearings, transfer possibilities. They circle those moments mentally, building their entire emotional world around something that may or may not happen. When those dates get postponed, denied, or canceled, the impact can be devastating. Time doesn't just pass in prison. It tests you. Long sentences change people differently than short ones. People doing short time live in a constant state of anticipation, counting down days aggressively, sometimes recklessly. People doing long time settle into something quieter, heavier. They stop rushing mentally, because rushing toward a distant finish line only creates exhaustion. This difference creates tension. Short-timers can seem impatient, careless, impulsive. Long-timers can seem detached, hardened, indifferent. Both are responding to the same pressure, just at different scales. Chapter 4 is where you start noticing the signs of time damage. People forgetting details about their old lives. People losing interest in conversations about the outside world. People who no longer talk about release at all. Not because they'll never get out, but because thinking about it hurts too much. You also begin to notice how time affects your body. Sleep patterns break down. Appetite changes. Your body adapts to constant alertness, even during rest. You feel tired without feeling rested. Days feel long, but years feel short when you look back. This distortion follows people long after release. But inside, it becomes normal. The prison uses routine to reinforce this distortion. Same schedules, same procedures, same announcements, over and over, until your internal clock starts syncing to the institution instead of the outside world. You wake up before count without alarms. You anticipate meals without hunger. You feel anxiety at the wrong times. Your body learns the prison before your mind does. One of the cruelest aspects of time inside is how it treats growth. On the outside, time usually means progress. Inside, progress is optional, sometimes discouraged. Self-improvement exists, but it's slow, limited, and often interrupted. Programs get canceled. Transfers reset progress. Lockdowns erase momentum. You learn not to get too attached to plans. Because plans assume stability, and prison rarely provides it. Chapter 4 also introduces the concept of dead time. Hours where nothing happens. No work. No programs. No movement. Just sitting. Thinking. Existing. These hours can be more exhausting than busy ones. With nothing external to focus on, your mind turns inward, replaying memories, regrets, imagined futures. This is where people struggle the most. Some fill dead time with exercise, some with books, some with conversation, some with sleep. Others fill it with anger. Anger passes time quickly, but it leaves damage behind. It burns energy you can't afford to lose. It creates conflicts that stretch sentences longer. And once anger becomes a habit, it's hard to turn off. The smartest survival strategy becomes learning how to kill time without letting time kill you. That balance is rare. By the end of Chapter 4, you understand something that isn't obvious from the outside. The prison sentence isn't just measured in years. It's measured in how long you can hold on to a sense of meaning while everything around you is designed to feel repetitive, controlled, and endless. It's measured in how you survive boredom, delay, and uncertainty without losing yourself completely. Time inside this place isn't empty. It's heavy, and every day you survive it, you're carrying weight that most people will never have to imagine. Most people think prison violence is loud. They imagine fights in hallways, riots in yards, alarms screaming as chaos explodes without warning. And while those moments do happen, they are not what defines daily survival. The real battles inside this place are quieter, slower, and far more dangerous. Chapter 5 begins when you realize that conflict doesn't need fists to leave scars. The quiet wars are always happening. They exist in conversations that sound harmless but aren't. In favors that come with invisible prices. in looks exchanged across a room that mean more than words ever could. These conflicts don't announce themselves. They build patiently, waiting for the right moment to surface. In here, power rarely shows itself openly. It's tested instead. Someone takes your seat when you leave it unattended. Someone bumps into you a little harder than necessary in the hallway. Someone spreads a small rumor, just enough to see how it travels. None of these actions demand an immediate response, but all of them require a decision. Ignore it, and you may be seen as weak. Overreact, and you may invite escalation. Respond the wrong way, and you may create a problem you can't undo. This constant evaluation becomes exhausting. The quiet wars teach you restraint before they teach you aggression. You learn that not every slight requires a response, but some absolutely do. Knowing the difference is one of the hardest skills to develop, because the consequences of guessing wrong can follow you for months or years. One of the most dangerous quiet wars is over reputation. Reputation in prison is not about popularity. It's about predictability. People want to know what happens if they push you. Not because they plan to, but because uncertainty creates anxiety, and anxiety breeds testing. If people believe you won't respond to pressure, pressure increases. If they believe you'll explode over nothing, pressure increases too. The safest reputation is consistency. You become known as someone who doesn't start problems, but doesn't avoid them either. Someone who doesn't talk too much. Someone who handles situations cleanly and then moves on. This reputation isn't built through speeches or threats. It's built through dozens of small moments where you choose carefully how to act. Chapter 5 is also where you learn about leverage. Leverage isn't always physical. Often, it's informational. Who knows what about who? Who saw what? Who heard what? In a closed environment, information is currency, and the wrong piece of information in the wrong hands can change everything. That's why people guard their personal details so closely. Where you're from, what you're in for, how long you have left, who you talk to on the phone. These details seem harmless, but they can be used to categorize you, pressure you, or pull you into situations you never asked to be part of. Even silence can be interpreted as a move in these quiet wars. Not responding to questions can be seen as strength or suspicion. Saying, "I don't know," too often can look evasive. Saying too much can look careless. Every interaction becomes a calculation, whether you want it to or not. Then there's the war over resources. Phones, commissary, space, time slots, access to programs. None of these things are evenly distributed, no matter what the official rules say. Scarcity creates tension, and tension creates conflict. Some people hoard resources. Some trade them. Some protect them aggressively. You learn quickly that accepting help can create obligation. Borrowing something small can lead to expectations much larger than you anticipated. So you learn to do without whenever possible, even when it's uncomfortable. Independence becomes a shield. The quiet wars also play out in alliances. These aren't always formal or obvious. Sometimes they're just patterns. People who sit together. People who walk together. People who share information quietly. These alliances shift constantly, influenced by transfers, conflicts, and changing power dynamics. You learn not to rely too heavily on any single connection, because alliances protect you until they don't. One of the most unsettling realizations in Chapter 5 is how normal all of this starts to feel. At first, the tension keeps you on edge. Every interaction feels loaded. Every day feels like it could turn sideways without warning. But over time, your baseline adjusts. The stress becomes familiar. The calculations become automatic. You don't think about survival anymore. You practice it. This is where emotional fatigue sets in. Not dramatic exhaustion, but a low-level drain that never quite goes away. Being alert all the time takes energy. Reading people takes energy. Holding back reactions takes energy. Over weeks and months, that energy has to come from somewhere. Some people burn out. They become irritable, short-tempered, reckless. They stop caring about consequences because caring takes effort they no longer have. This is often when the quiet wars turn loud, when small tensions finally explode into visible conflict. Others shut down. They withdraw emotionally, limiting interactions to the bare minimum. They become quiet, distant, hard to read. This can protect them, but it can also make them invisible in ways that aren't always safe. Chapter 5 shows you that there is no perfect strategy. Every approach has risks. Every choice closes some doors and opens others. Survival here is not about eliminating danger. It's about managing it. By the end of this chapter, you understand something that outsiders almost never see. The most exhausting part of prison isn't the violence. It's the constant negotiation. The mental chess game that never stops. The pressure to be calm, aware, controlled, and adaptable at all times. The understanding that peace is temporary and must be maintained deliberately. The quiet wars don't leave visible bruises, but they shape who you are just as much as anything else inside these walls. And by the time you've learned how to fight them without fighting at all, you're already changed in ways you may not fully recognize yet. When people imagine the end of a prison story, they imagine gates opening. They imagine a final count, paperwork signed, property returned, and a person stepping back into the world as if crossing a simple boundary. Inside to outside, locked to free, past to future. It feels clean in theory. It almost never is. The truth is, prison doesn't end when the sentence does. It doesn't end when the door opens or when your feet hit the pavement outside. For many people, that's only when the most confusing part begins. Because nothing prepares you for how quiet freedom feels. Inside, noise never stops. Even in silence, there is movement, tension, awareness. Outside, the absence of that constant pressure can feel disorienting. The world feels too open, too fast, too unpredictable in ways prison never was. You are no longer told where to stand, when to eat, when to sleep. And instead of relief, that sudden freedom of choice can feel overwhelming. People assume release is pure happiness. But happiness requires safety, and safety requires familiarity. And prison, for better or worse, becomes familiar. That's the part no one likes to talk about. The habits built inside don't disappear overnight. You still scan rooms automatically. You still measure tone and body language. You still sit with your back to the wall. Crowds feel dangerous. Silence feels suspicious. You react before thinking because inside, hesitation was costly. The prison trained you for survival in one environment. Then it released you into another without retraining. Some people try to erase their time inside. They avoid talking about it. They avoid thinking about it. They bury it under work, distractions, noise. For a while, it works. Until something small triggers an old response, and suddenly they're back inside mentally, even if their body isn't. Others carry prison with them openly. They speak about it with blunt honesty. They wear it like armor, like proof that they endured something most people never will. But even that strength comes with weight, because endurance hardens you, and hardness can make connection difficult. Trust, once rationed carefully inside, doesn't automatically expand outside. Freedom demands vulnerability. Prison punished it. This contradiction becomes one of the hardest things to navigate. And then there's the stigma. No matter how much time has passed, how much someone has changed, how much they've rebuilt, the label follows quietly. Applications, background checks, side glances, conversations that shift tone once the truth comes out. Society says it believes in rehabilitation, but it rarely practices it consistently. This reinforces the lesson prison taught best. Stay guarded. Even for those who never leave, the ending is still complicated. Some people will spend their entire lives inside these walls. For them, the future narrows until it becomes routine. Birthdays blend together. Losses are felt from a distance. The outside world becomes something they hear about rather than participate in. But even there, life doesn't stop completely. People still form friendships, still find moments of humor, still create meaning in places where meaning feels scarce. That resilience is real, even if it's born out of necessity. And that's what makes prison so difficult to understand from the outside. It is not a single experience. It is thousands of individual adaptations happening under the same roof. Some people are broken by it. Some are reshaped. Some emerge stronger in ways that are invisible until tested. What remains consistent is the impact. Prison teaches lessons whether you want to learn them or not. It teaches patience through force. It teaches awareness through fear. It teaches self-control through consequence. It teaches silence through survival. And it leaves marks that don't fade easily. This documentary was never about glorifying prison or reducing it to shock value. It was about showing what happens in the spaces people don't see, in the moments that don't make headlines, in the slow psychological shifts that define life behind the walls. Because understanding prison isn't about defending crime or excusing harm. It's about understanding reality. It's about recognizing that punishment doesn't exist in isolation. It shapes people, and shaped people eventually return to society, whether through release or through influence, policy, or legacy. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It only makes its consequences harder to deal with later. If there's one thing to take away from this story, it's this. Prison doesn't just remove freedom. It rewires how freedom is experienced. And once that happens, the effects reach far beyond the walls themselves. The gates may close. The doors may lock. The sentence may end. But the experience stays. And whether we acknowledge it or not, its shapes lives on both sides of the bars. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.